All right, in this section, we're going to go over every single person who you're going to interact with on the deal so that way you're not surprised. A lot of these people don't work for the same business, but they're kind of parts of a whole. So, for instance, your real estate agent's going to work for a brokerage, your mortgage broker is going to work for a different bank, the inspector is his own person, and the appraiser works for the bank. So, even though every single person you're going to come across works for a separate institution, basically they have to work together in order for the deal to go through. And it's your responsibility to make sure everyone has what they need and they're all on the same page and that the documentation is flowing smoothly from person to person. So that way there's no surprises. We're going to go over every single person you're going to run into. First is your real estate agent. Now, the real estate agent is a person who brokers the purchase and sale of real estate. In this class, we're basically focusing on using a real estate agent to help you purchase a property. Next is your mortgage broker. The mortgage broker is an intermediary who brings the mortgage borrowers and mortgage lenders together, but they don't use their own funds to originate the mortgage. So, in the last mortgage broker that I used, for instance, they basically set up the loan. And then, in essence, once they got the loan and the deal closed, they ended up selling the loan to Wells Fargo. I've had another mortgage broker who ended up closing the deal. Then, after 3 to 4 months, they sold it to Chase Bank, for instance. So the mortgage broker basically helps get everything together. That way, these bigger banks don't have to worry about hiring anyone. They just sit back and let these mortgage brokers get deals and bring them back to them so that they can refinance. And then the mortgage broker can just go off looking for new borrowers. The next person who you're going to run into is your inspector. Now, the inspector is a representative of the buyer, and he or she is normally licensed. And their sole responsibility is to outline defects that could be warning signs to larger issues. Now, don't worry, if you don't have an inspector lined up, your real estate agent should be connected enough where they have someone who is loyal to them and will do right by the buyer. Throughout time, though, eventually you'll work with a couple inspectors, and the ones who you like the most or helped you get a deal through, well, those are the ones that you should keep an eye out. And eventually, once you figure out their style, you'll be able to figure out which inspector is best for each deal. The next person who we're going to run into is the appraiser. Now, this one you got to be really cautious about. So even though you pay for the appraisal most of the time, okay, if you can negotiate for the seller to pay for the appraiser, that's great. But if I was selling a property, I would never ever pay for the appraiser. I would always make the buyer pay for the appraiser. The reason is because the appraiser works for the bank, okay? And the appraiser normally comes into the deal after the Binzer and the inspection period. So, in this case, their sole responsibility is to make sure that the house is worth the loan amount that the bank is giving you. So, if that's their job, it's pretty obvious that the appraiser works for the bank. They do not work for the borrower, they do not work for the seller. They represent the bank. And basically, the bank is hiring them to make sure that, hey, listen, if we're going to give this buyer $200,000, is this property even worth it? So that way, it's a strategy for the bank to mitigate potential losses in the event that you default on a loan. So that's the sole goal of the appraiser. So whenever you see appraiser, you think, okay, this person represents the bank. And now, last but not least is the title company. Normally, your real estate agent will have a title company who is going to connect you. So far, your real estate agent is important because we see that the real estate agent is going to be the one to connect you with the inspector and a title company. A lot of times, too, your real estate agent will suggest a mortgage broker especially one that is going to help get a deal through. But the last but not least is our title company. And the role of a title company is to validate that the documentation to the real estate is legitimately given to the home buyer. So, for instance, the title company is then determines if the seller has the rights to even sell the property. And then the deed is a legal and binding document used to transfer the property owner to the buyer, from property ownership to the buyer. And the title, though, which is different from the deed, is the actual documentation that states that you are the owner of the property. So that is your title company. And that is the story of who's who in your real estate transaction.